A brilliant student vanishes from her home without a trace. That was the headline that gripped a quiet college town in March 2008. A young woman with a promising future, gone overnight. No signs of struggle, no note, no goodbye. Just an empty room, an open front door, and a missing car. Her name was Eve Carson. She was the kind of person every parent dreams of raising. Driven, compassionate, endlessly curious. A top student, a community leader, a daughter, a friend. The kind of girl who stayed home to study while others went out partying. And on that night, it may have cost her everything. As police scrambled to understand what happened, clues began to surface. Strange ATM transactions, shadowy figures caught on surveillance cameras, and an abandoned vehicle that would blow the case wide open. What began as a missing persons case would spiral into a tale of senseless violence, missed opportunities, and a community's aching loss. This isn't just the story of a promising life cut short, it's a chilling look into how darkness can find its way into even the brightest of lives. And what they uncovered left the entire county not just shocked, but furious. Before her name was in headlines, Eve Carson was simply Eve, born on November 19, 1985 in Athens, Georgia. From a young age, she stood out, not just because she was smart, but because she cared. She volunteered at nursing homes, worked with abused teens, and even served as a congressional page while still in high school. Her teachers called her a natural leader. Her classmates called her inspiring. By the time she graduated, Eve had done more than most adults twice her age. She enrolled at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, double majoring in political science and biology, and quickly became one of the school's most admired students. She was a Morehead Cain Scholar, one of the most prestigious academic awards in the country, and served as student body president. But she didn't stop there. Eve taught science at local elementary schools, volunteered abroad in Ecuador, Egypt, and Cuba, and joined medical research projects that pushed the boundaries of global health. Her friends described her as magnetic, someone who made you feel heard, seen, and valued. Her professors called her a future leader of the world. Eve didn't just dream of change, she was already creating it. And that's what makes what happened next almost unbearable to comprehend. It was March 5th, 2008. Eve Carson was just months away from graduation. That night, around 1:30 a.m., her roommates were heading to a party and invited Eve to come along. But she declined. She had classes to prepare for and decided to stay home and study. That was the last time they saw her alive. By 4:30 a.m., her friends returned. The front door was wide open. The lights were still on. Eve was gone, and so was her car. At first, they assumed she might have stepped out, maybe for a late-night errand. They tried calling, no answer. But when the sun rose and Evie still hadn't returned, a sinking feeling set in. One of her friends went to the police, and what they heard next changed everything. That morning, police had already discovered the body of a young woman lying on a quiet residential street about a mile from Eve's house. No phone, no wallet, no ID. She had been shot multiple times. The photo they showed Eve's friend left no doubt it was her. From that moment, a timeline began to form. At 1:30 a.m., Eve was home. By 3:30 a.m., her laptop was still active. She had still been studying. By 5 a.m., she was dead. But how did she get from her desk to a cold street corner? Who forced her out of the house? And why? As news of Eve Carson's death shattered the serenity of Chapel Hill, the pressure on investigators was immense. They were looking for a killer, or possibly killers, who had abducted a student from her home, murdered her in cold blood, and vanished without leaving so much as a fingerprint behind. The first line of inquiry was Eve's car. It was missing from the driveway when her roommates returned. To the police, this raised red flags. If this was a burglary gone wrong, why steal the car? Why go through the trouble of moving the body when the victim was already dead? Then came the second major anomaly. Eve's room wasn't ransacked. Her laptop was still there, and it showed signs of being active until around 3:30 a.m., nearly 2 hours after her roommates left. This placed the window of her disappearance between 3:30 and 5 a.m. when gunshots were reported by a nearby resident. Forensics found no signs of forced entry. The front door was left open, almost intentionally. Her wallet and credit cards were gone, but there was no struggle, no overturned furniture, and no physical evidence of a fight. It was clinical, as if she was led out of the house, not dragged. The next clue arrived in the form of her abandoned car, found several miles away, parked near a wooded area. It was towed for forensic processing. Inside the vehicle, crime scene techs collected fingerprints, stray hairs, and fiber samples. But the biggest find was yet to come. That came when detectives reviewed Eve's bank statements. At 3:48 a.m., just 18 minutes after her laptop went inactive, someone withdrew 700 in two separate transactions at an ATM across town. The maximum daily limit. Whoever had her, they weren't just abducting her, they were exploiting her. Police rushed to the ATM and pulled surveillance footage. The tape revealed a man sitting in Eve's car, reaching through the window to operate the ATM. His face was mostly shadowed. In the back seat, there was movement, a blurry figure. Investigators feared it could be Eve, alive but held hostage. But the image was too degraded to confirm it. They tried enhancement software, but the footage offered no more than a silhouette. Then, another twist. Eve's card was used again, at a different ATM in a nearby town. This time, it wasn't the same man, it was someone else. Two people, one victim, and a rapidly collapsing window of time. Now detectives had a new theory. This wasn't a one-man crime. Eve may have been targeted by a pair of predators, and one of them might still be using her identity. The race to identify the two suspects was on, but what they would uncover next would unearth an even more disturbing truth. With two ATM surveillance videos and two different suspects, investigators knew they were facing a more complex crime than they initially suspected. This wasn't a simple robbery, it was coordinated, calculated, and deeply disturbing. The first suspect, seen in Eve's car at the ATM just after 3:30 a.m., became their top priority. But the grainy footage yielded little. The image was dark, blurred by the low-resolution camera and poor lighting. Forensic experts enhanced the frame as best they could, sharpening edges, isolating facial contours. But they still couldn't get a clear ID. And worse, the person in the back seat remained a mystery. Was it Eve? Was she alive during the withdrawal? Was she begging for her life just out of frame? Then the second video, captured nearly 2 days later, changed everything. This time, a man tried using Eve's card at a convenience store ATM in another town. The timestamp, March 7th, 12:31 a.m., over 48 hours after Eve's murder. Unlike the previous ATM, this store had a functioning, high-angle camera with better resolution. The footage showed a young black man wearing a dark hoodie and jeans, attempting to withdraw money. He was alone, calm. He didn't linger. But crucially, he wasn't the man from the first video. Now the case took a dangerous new turn. Either the killer was working with someone, or he had passed Eve's card to another person. And in either case, the suspects were bold enough to continue using a murdered woman's identity. Detectives released both surveillance photos to the media, urging the public for any information. And it worked. The calls came fast. Some were false leads. Others were people reporting neighbors who matched the description. But one call stood out. It came from a man who refused to give his name. But his voice was steady. "That guy in the second video," he said. "His name's Demario Atwater." Detectives ran the name through the system. Their jaws dropped. At just 21 years old, Demario Atwater had a lengthy criminal record. Armed robbery, drug possession, weapons charges, assault. He'd been arrested multiple times, skirted jail time, and was currently awaiting trial for carrying a handgun while on probation, just 2 days after Eve's death. What's more, he lived just blocks from the convenience store where the second withdrawal was made. Within hours, police were at Atwater's door. He denied everything. "I don't know no Eve," he insisted. But when they showed him the ATM footage, he stopped talking. He was arrested on suspicion of identity theft and held without bail. But the biggest break came shortly after, with another name. Lawrence Alvin Levet Jr., just 17 years old. Atwater's phone logs showed frequent calls and texts to Levet in the days leading up to the murder. Investigators pulled Levet's file and instantly recognized him. He was the driver in the first ATM footage, the man in Eve's car. Levette had a record too: auto theft, burglary, drug charges, all before turning 18. But this wasn't juvenile mischief. It was escalating. When officers went to arrest him, he barricaded himself inside his house. The situation escalated fast. SWAT was called in. After hours of negotiation, he finally surrendered. Now both men were in custody, but neither was talking. No confession, no cooperation. Just two suspects and a mountain of circumstantial evidence. But behind the silence, the truth was waiting, and detectives were determined to piece it together before Eve Carson's story faded into just another tragedy. But even with the arrests of Demario Atwater and Lawrence Levette, police didn't know how Eve had gone from her study desk to a roadside murder scene. That is, until Atwater broke. Facing a mountain of evidence and the looming threat of the death penalty, Demario struck a deal: life in prison without parole in exchange for a full confession and testimony against Levette. And what he revealed was sickening. On the night of March 4th, 2008, Atwater and Levette were driving around Chapel Hill in a stolen car. They weren't looking for trouble. They were hunting for it. Demario said Levette spotted Eve through the window, alone in her brightly lit living room, just a few blocks from campus. They parked, watched, and then they broke in. Armed with handguns, they forced Eve into her own car. They didn't wear masks. They didn't care. She was terrified, pleading, offering to give them anything. That night, they drove her from ATM to ATM, making withdrawals. She gave them her PIN. She cooperated. She begged for her life. But it wasn't enough. Demario told investigators they drove to a wooded area, a quiet residential street, and parked. It was there in the silence of dawn that they made the decision. She'd seen their faces. She couldn't be allowed to live. But before they pulled the trigger, Eve asked them to pray with her. That moment, raw, heartbreaking, desperate, was Eve's last. Instead of praying, they executed her. She was shot 5 times. 2 different guns were used, confirming both men participated. One shot was to the head, the fatal one. They left her on the roadside like garbage. Then they vanished, using her car, her cards, her identity. Demario's confession broke the case wide open. It confirmed every suspicion and gave prosecutors the narrative they needed. The randomness, the brutality, the cold-blooded choice to murder a woman who had done nothing but exist in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was a crime so senseless, so pointless, that it made the pain even worse. Eve wasn't targeted because of who she was. She was targeted because she was alone. The only motive was money, $2,400 total. That was the price of her life. With the confession, the courtroom would no longer hear speculation. They would hear the truth in Demario Atwater's own words. In the spring of 2010, 2 years after Eve's murder, the first courtroom doors opened. Demario Atwater, now 23, stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit, calm, expressionless. He had already confessed. The plea deal he accepted spared him from the death penalty, but it didn't spare him from facing Eve's family. When the verdict was read, sentencing him to life in prison without the possibility of parole plus 30 additional years, Atwater turned to Eve's parents and said, "I'm sorry, I know it doesn't matter. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I am sorry." It was the only moment of emotion anyone would witness from him. But while Atwater's fate was sealed, Lawrence Levette, just 17 at the time of the crime, was a more complicated case. In December 2011, his trial began. Despite overwhelming evidence, Levette refused to plead guilty. His defense claimed he was innocent, that he wasn't there, that Atwater had lied to save himself. But the evidence said otherwise. Surveillance footage placed him driving Eve's car. ATM logs showed his pattern of withdrawals. Cell tower data pinged him in Eve's neighborhood that night. And most damning of all, Atwater's confession detailed Lawrence's role in the abduction, the withdrawals, and ultimately, the murder. The prosecution laid out the timeline with chilling precision, walking jurors through the final hours of Eve's life. They read from witness statements, showed photos of Eve's body, and played security camera footage, frame by grainy frame. It took less than 2 days for the jury to convict Levette. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. But that wasn't the end. In 2013, the North Carolina Court of Appeals overturned his sentence, not because he was innocent, but because of his age. A new legal precedent ruled that sentencing juveniles to life without parole could be unconstitutional unless the court proved the offender was irreparably corrupt. So lled was granted a new trial. In court, he spoke. He told the judge, "Everyone makes mistakes. I'm not the monster people think I am." But his words rang hollow. Not once did he apologize. Not once did he show remorse. And again, after days of testimony and evidence, he was sentenced to life in prison. Only this time it stuck. Lawrence lled, once a 17-year-old with a long juvenile record, would grow old behind bars. Both men had been brought to justice, but there was no victory in it. Eve was still gone, her parents still grieving, her community forever changed. Eve Carson's death didn't just shake the University of North Carolina, it shattered it. In the weeks following her murder, candlelight vigils lit up the campus lawns. Hundreds gathered, students, faculty, community members, many of them in tears, many still trying to process the senselessness of it all. They clutched photographs, wore blue ribbons, and shared stories about Eve's boundless energy, her laugh, her humility. One of her professors said, "She had the kind of mind that lit up a room, but more than that, she made you feel like you mattered." Even those who didn't know her personally mourned her deeply because Eve had become a symbol of what was good in young people, a student with brilliance, compassion, and a desire to make the world better. But her death also sparked something more tangible: change. In December 2008, just months after the crime, North Carolina passed a new law aimed at strengthening penalties for gang-related crimes, the kind of background both Atwater and lled had. The law expanded the definition of gang involvement, enforced stricter sentences, and emphasized intervention and prevention strategies at the juvenile level. Lawmakers publicly cited Eve's case as the catalyst. At UNC, a memorial garden was built in her name, a quiet space on campus where students could sit, reflect, and remember. Her favorite flowers, hydrangeas, and irises were planted there. More importantly, the university established the Eve Marie Carson Scholarship, a merit-based award for juniors who embodied her spirit, leadership, service, and academic excellence. It wasn't just a tribute, it was a way to keep her legacy alive, to pay forward what Eve had done for others. Outside campus, her family started the Eve Carson Foundation, supporting educational programs for underprivileged students. The aim was simple but powerful: to create the kind of world Eve had dreamed of, one filled with opportunity, equality, and hope. In 2009, one of Eve's close friends made it to the finals on American Idol. On live television, he credited Eve as his inspiration. "She always believed in me. She told me not to wait, that life was short, that if I had something to say, I should sing it." It was more than a performance. It was a eulogy in melody. Eve Carson's story is not just about a promising life cut short. It's about the devastating cost of randomness, of two young men who set out with no plan but violence, of a world where even the brightest lights can be extinguished in a moment. But it's also about how we respond to loss. Eve's life left behind more than grief. It left a blueprint for kindness, for leadership, for service, and her memory continues to inspire people to step up, to serve others, and to create the kind of world she believed was possible. We cannot undo what happened that night in March 2008, but we can ask ourselves, are we paying attention? Are we investing in the kids who feel invisible? Are we teaching empathy in a world hardened by apathy? Because the most powerful way to honor Eve is to live more like her, to lead, to give, to love, and to refuse to believe that cynicism must win. If this story moved you, please consider sharing it. Leave a comment below. Tell us how Eve's legacy inspires you. And if you believe these stories must be told, subscribe to support more in-depth true crime documentaries like this one. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, stay compassionate, and remember, the brightest lights never truly go out. They become stars we follow.